Beef producers work hard every day to be good stewards of the land and their livestock so that they can produce a safe, wholesome beef product that provides consumers with a great eating experience. Today we're going to talk about telling the beef industry story to an often skeptical public. Welcome to this edition of the Beef Roundtable. I'm Dr. Ron Lemonade, your Beef Extension Specialist at Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana.
And I'm Burt Rutherford, Senior Editor of Beef Magazine. I'm based in Denver, Colorado. Each month on this program, we discuss different topics of importance to you, and we hope to help you do a better job in your operation. And that's what we're going to do this month as well, but we're going to take a little different turn, and we're going to talk about how to tell your story, how to tell it effectively.
The Beef Roundtable is recorded live and edited to fit the time constraints of the program. The program is available at the Beef Magazine website, iTunes, YouTube.com, as well as www.beefroundtable.com.
Our guests today are Anne Burkholder. Anne's a city girl who was raised in Palm Beach County, Florida, attended an Ivy League school with a degree in psychology from Dartmouth University. Yet today, she operates Will Feedyard Incorporated. That's a 3,000 head capacity feed yard in Cozad, Nebraska. Through her blog, Feedyard Foodie, she educates visitors about the beef industry and about cattle feeding in particular.
Our second guest is Kim Brackett. She served on the Cattleman's Beef Board for over 5 years, acting as Secretary-Treasurer, Vice Chair, and Chairman. She is an owner and partner on the family ranch, Brackett Ranches LP, a cow-calf and stocker operation located near Castleford, Idaho. My first question goes to Kim. Kim, what role and responsibility do we as beef producers have to relate our beef story and promote and advocate, that to our consumers?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the Beef Roundtable today. I appreciate the invitation. But I think that taking the time to answer our consumers' questions and engaging with them, addressing any concerns that they may have, I believe that's one of the key responsibilities that we do have as participants in the beef industry. I think that this outreach can be done through social media very effectively, but it can also be done one-on-one in our daily conversations with consumers we come across each day. It's important to remember that we're all consumers, and the consumer that you might come across could be your child's teacher, it could be the person that works behind the counter at the parts store. But they're all consumers, and chances are they don't know the beef story.
Kim, let me follow up on that. We talk some and a lot in the beef business about being transparent, about transparency in what we do as producers. Can we harness that transparency in a way to highlight the correct things we do, the right things that we do as far as producing beef?
Absolutely. As you mentioned, transparency is being demanded of us by our consumers. And fortunately, we do have some good tools to show that transparency to our consumers. The Beef Quality Assurance Program, the BQA program, is a science-based program that we can show our consumers this is how we take care of our animals, and this is why. And as a producer, I always look forward to opportunities to share with consumers exactly what we do on our outfit. I want them to know how we care for our animals and how we care for our land. And honestly, every time I've talked to a consumer, I've been met back with appreciation, I think is the word. They tend to appreciate more what we do every day to help provide food, and they mostly appreciate that I took the time to sit down and have that conversation with them.
Anne, Kim mentioned social media. So, it's obviously become a popular way for people to communicate in today's society, and probably especially among the millennial generation. Do you think that social media is a trusted way of receiving information when consumers are formulating their opinions about the beef industry? And to take that one step further, even when they think about making buying decisions. How does that play?
In 2016, I think that social media drives a lot of things in our country. And I think as beef as beef farmers, we all need to recognize that it's a great tool for us to use to share our story. And when I think about what I try to do with my Feedyard Foodie blog, my goal is to be the glow that illuminates. So when I say that, I mean that I want my story, I want my pictures, I want my words to tell a detailed and passionate, emotional, yet also accurate story of how we raise beef in this country. And I think that using social media and really embracing it as a two-way communication street, it is a great way for us to create some transparency in the food supply, not only to share our story, but also to hear our customers' story and hear what they're concerned about, and then start a dialogue and a respectful discussion so that we can all learn a little bit better of where our food comes from.
And let me follow up a little bit on that with you, and particularly in regard to the urban consumer. Do you have conversations with those people on your blog? How do those conversations go? And then what tips might you give to other producers about having those kinds of conversations?
Yes, I have those conversations. I would tell you they're very eclectic, and they run the gamut. I think that perhaps I learn almost as much from those conversations as hopefully the folks do that initiate them with me. I have an Ask Me section at the top of my blog site where people can send me personal emails if they want to ask a question without having the whole world know what it is. And that's created some really great dialogues over the years. I started blogging in 2011, and I've received messages from vegetarians that say, you know, Anne, I don't eat meat because I don't believe in doing that, but if I did, I would eat yours because I think that you're doing a good job of taking care of your animals and taking care of your environment. So it actually takes a lot of time to have those individual interactions, and Kim talked about having those in your daily life, and you know, reaching out to school teachers, reaching out to the folks that buy groceries in the grocery store with you. I certainly have those interactions, but I have a lot of electronic interactions as well. Anytime that you reach far away from your farm, it's easier to do that electronically, and I do have people take advantage of that. Honestly, you know, when I think back to before I became a feed yard operator, before I really understood the beef industry, I didn't have a lot of questions and concerns about where my beef came from because I had an inherent trust in the farmer. Somewhere in the last 20 years during my professional lifetime, we've lost that. And it really doesn't do any good to try to figure out why, and it certainly doesn't do any good to bemoan it. What we need to do is recognize it and then go out there and try to work on rebuilding that trust. And I think that you rebuild trust by being yourself. And I remember when I first started blogging, somebody told me, they said, you know, Anne, you're the authority on Anne, and you're the authority on your farm. And so I encourage everybody else out there that has a farm and that wants to reach out via social media, recognize that you're the authority on you, and so tell your story. I truly believe that stories are what make people believers because they build trust. And I run my operation based on science because I recognize that when you're a good cattle caregiver, you use science to base your decisions. And I certainly try to put some of that on my blog site, but you'll find a lot of emotion, you'll find a lot of personal stories, you'll find lots of pictures of my kids and my family on my blog. I do that for a variety of reasons. The first one is I don't compartmentalize my life, so if I'm going to have a blog that talks about Anne, it's going to have lots of different things in it because that's what makes up Anne, and certainly my family is a huge part of that. But the second reason why I've chosen to move that direction is because I think that when people feel like they get to know me, and they get to know my favorite blonde cowgirl and my favorite farmer, they get to know the Burkholders, then that gives them some confidence and assurance when they go to the grocery store to believe that the people that are making the beef that they're buying are actually good, wholesome, trustworthy people just like them.
I think that makes a great segue into a question that I'm going to throw to Kim here. The typical American consumer is several generations removed from production agriculture. So how do we as producers reacquaint them with what we do in agriculture to produce a safe, wholesome beef product?
I think that is a tremendous problem. I have to tell you, I am amazed here in my own little small town how many folks don't have a basic understanding of production agriculture, let alone the beef industry. But I think another way, in addition to social media that Anne talked about, and that's a great outreach, but another way we can do it is intentional outreach by producers with the consumers in their community. I try to encourage producers to write down 2 or 3 things that they most want to share with consumers about what they do on their outfit. What are the things they really want them to know about exactly how they care for their cattle or how they care for their land? And I call that their 3-minute elevator speech. And then I encourage them to get out there and actively seek opportunities to share that information with consumers. And try to remember that everybody you interact with is a consumer. We're all consumers. So they're the people you're standing in line with, like we mentioned before. It could be the teller at the bank. For example, my husband this week was at the UPS store mailing a package. And the woman behind the counter had her 2 small children at work with her that day. A little boy, he must have been 3 or 4 years old, and he saw my husband and he came up and he said, "Are you a real cowboy? Do you have cows and horses?" And my husband, he had a great little conversation with the little boy. But when he got to the counter, the mom entered that conversation. And she had some beef production questions for my husband, and he was able to answer them. And they had a great conversation. So be open and be willing to have those conversations anywhere you go. It may surprise you how many people do have questions and how interested they're going to be in your answers.
I found that to be true, when you're traveling for meetings around the country, sitting on a plane. A lot of times you're sitting by a consumer that's not from a farm background, and those conversations are pretty intriguing, okay, as to what questions that they ask and what they're concerned about. Do you think that and I'm going to ask this to both of you, do you think women are more effective in telling the story than men are? All right? I mean, can consumers relate to the mom factor, and having children, and is that more effective than being on the dad side, which isn't quite as maternal and maybe as close to, the consumer in terms of connectivity? You see any difference there?
I think for different audiences. Women tend to be the ones who purchase the beef in the home and make those nutrition decisions. I have 4 small children. Well, I guess I can't say small. My oldest is 15 now. But I am very busy with their school lives. So I interact with other moms and I interact with other teachers. And so in those situations, I think you're right. I think being a woman is an advantage from the maternal point. I can explain to them about how we do care for the calves and for the cows on our ranch, and it carries a little more weight. But my husband also has a lot of great conversations, perhaps at the parts store, or you might run into him when I send him to the grocery store to get milk on the way home, because he is obviously a cowboy. He's got his big flat hat, he's got his boots on, he might have spurs on in the middle of the grocery store aisle, but people approach him because they know he's a cowboy. So I think in both cases it depends on the audience that you're trying to reach. Anne probably has another answer for that.
Anne, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I do. I think that one of the things I've learned over the years is that when you have a conversation with somebody, especially about questions that are difficult, the most important thing is to find some common ground. And I think that goes a long way to what Kim was saying. When I have a conversation with a mom or another young woman, we have lots of things that we can find in common. And I think that helps us to not only celebrate our differences, but also recognize that, at our very core, we're a lot the same. We love our families, we love our communities, we love our farms, we love the earth, and it's important to us that we put safe and healthy food on the table. So when I have a conversation with that audience, I think that it is very beneficial because we share that common ground. One of the things that I've found over the years, my cattle actually have made me a better communicator. And I was a psychology major, and so I'm a bit of a nerd that direction. But, I walked into the beef industry at age 22 not understanding anything about it. And I think that if I could put my finger on the one thing that has helped make me a better communicator, it's learning how to interact with a prey animal. You have to notice things. You have to look at the world the way that they do, not the way that you do. And I think that when you develop that type of maturity and you become effective at that, you can broaden that to other aspects of your life. And so when I talk to somebody that doesn't live in rural America, that doesn't understand agriculture, I think I have an easier time now putting myself in their shoes and empathizing with them than I did 20 years ago.
Kim and Anne, I'm going to throw this question out to both of you. You know, one of the things that it seems like we're dealing with in the beef business all the time is just negative, and even perhaps false information. You know, fast food nation and Michael Pollan's The Omnivore's Dilemma are a couple of examples. How, in your opinion, can we deal with that? How can producers counter that kind of information?
Okay, I'll go first. I think those books and movies, a lot of the reason that they're created is to antagonize our industry. And so my advice is don't take the bait. Don't get defensive about this. There's a lot of research out there that says consumers don't want to be lectured about our industry. They don't want to hear a top-down lecture about why beef is good for them or about why we really do care for our animals. They want a conversation. They want an open dialogue. They want to be able to ask their questions and have them answered openly and honestly. And I really believe that that's the best response we can take as producers, is to engage in that open communication and keep that dialogue going. Frankly, we really need to be at least as loud as those people who are speaking against us. And in order to do that, each and every one of us, all of us beef producers, need to be actively engaged in having that conversation within our communities.
So, you know, I'm laughing when you bring those books up. I've actually talked about some of those books on my blog site. I always do it when a reader asks me to. And in particular, Fast Food Nation is a really interesting story. There's a large urban school, high school in Omaha that requires that book to be read as part of their curriculum. And the teacher and the students found my blog, and they sent me a list of questions about the book because they were looking for kind of the other side of the story. And it was fascinating for me to read their questions and then read the book, and then report back to them on what I saw, you know, on my farm and in the packing plant and in the beef production cycle. And so I think that in that regard, if we can, going back to what Kim has said over and over again, if we can have communication and we can have a dialogue, I think that those books can give us you know, something to start with in order to then bridge back to what we feel like is the true story. You know, I started talking about how I wanted my blog to be the glow that illuminates. You know, I would almost venture to say those books are the glare that obscures. They are casting a very specific and very bright light on food production, and often they can obscure the reality. And so I think we always need to come back to our own story. How do we raise beef? How do we take care of cattle? What's important to us? What are the other facets of our lives that are important to us as well, even outside of our farms? And when we can tell that story, then I think that we become the glow that illuminates. And whenever you can do that, I think that you start to downplay that glare that obscures. And eventually you're going to find a large group of people that starts to understand that that maybe the farmer is the best person to turn to when you've got questions about how your food is raised.
That kind of brings me back around. And let me ask you a question about, and this is going back a little bit, but do you think your background being non-farm, okay, growing up, okay, makes you more insightful as to what the consumer is thinking?
I think that's a tricky question. So I'm a psychology nerd. So perhaps you could argue that part of me plays more of a role than the fact that I didn't grow up in agriculture. Although I think that I can say that I believe that the consumer, that my customer, has a right to ask for transparency. I also think that I have a right to tell my story in my way, deciding an appropriate level of transparency depending on who the person is that is asking the question, and quite frankly, what questions are they asking? So yes, I think it brings in a different, it certainly brings a different background for me to the conversation, and I can certainly empathize with that person because I used to not really understand where my food came from. Although I would say that in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up, people were a lot less interested in where their food came from. So I don't think that I was unique in that I didn't understand where my food came from. And I would maybe venture to say 20 years down the road, which is where I am today, that perhaps my interest in psychology and understanding the brain and having good communication and everything that I do perhaps plays a larger role.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Kim and Anne, any last comments, any last thoughts that you think a beef producer might want to know or need to know about how to better communicate ultimately with the people who consume our product?
Well, I would say just remember that the people that you have conversations with, you do share a lot in common with. I think that in 2016 we live in a world where people certainly celebrate their differences, but I think it's also important for the unity of our country, as well as the stability of our food supply, to recognize that we all share a lot of common ground. And while we can celebrate our differences, I think we need to embrace our unity. And remember that the people that you're talking to, even though maybe you've never met them, or maybe you have, maybe it's the person in the checkout line at the grocery store. Remember that they have their own story just like you have your story. And we need to respect each other's stories, and we need to empathize with each other, and we need to look outside of ourselves in order to really share.
And I think I would say, I'd follow that up. Anne brings some really good points to find the common ground, but I sometimes think we tend to be a little more reticent about what we do, and I would encourage producers to put yourselves out there, to be willing to have that conversation with the lady at the UPS store, but put yourselves out there and be willing to talk about what it is that you do.
So how does Masters of Beef Advocacy, it's kind of a checkoff funded program, how does that play into producer preparation, okay, to be able to have some of these conversations?
Masters of Beef Advocacy is a checkoff funded program. It's been going for several years now, and they have many, many graduates. What it does is it takes the beef production story and it breaks it down into several different segments. And you can access those different segments, and it gives you information about areas you might not feel as strong in. You work your way through the program and you become a graduate, an MBA graduate. And what it does is it prepares you to go out there in social media or perhaps one-on-one, and it gives you those resources to have those conversations with consumers that we've been talking about in today's roundtable.
How does our educational system, okay, grade schools, middle schools, fit into this educational process to the consumer of the future or the buyer of beef in the future? Any thoughts on that?
Our kids are our future. And I do a lot of coaching and mentoring in my rural community because I look at those kids and I think, yeah, that's our future. That's awesome. Don't we want to go out and impact them and help them find themselves so that they can go out and be productive members of this country that we love? And so reaching out to classes, participating in agriculture in the classroom, speaking to FFA groups, allowing yourself to have personal interactions with the next generation, I think is really critical. And going back to the Masters of Beef Advocacy program, I view the MBA program as a really important tool in my toolbox. When I want to go out and do a task on my farm, I always make sure I have my toolbox with me because I want to make sure that I have what I need when I get there. And I look at the MBA program like that. There's a lot of honor to the story of growing food. There's honor in the care that we as farmers offer to our animals and our land. Honestly, there's honor in the gift that the animal gives at the time of sacrifice when they become beef and other beef products that enrich our lives and make us have a better life. And so I think in order to celebrate that and to really talk about it, you need to make sure that you've got those tools in your toolbox when you go out and share your story. And that can be the case in the UPS store, that can be the case in your local high school, that can be the case in an online interaction. It exists everywhere. But I truly believe that the youth is it's our future. And as awesome as it is, it's also a responsibility for us to make sure that we do our part mentoring and making sure that they're educated and understand where their food comes from and what a gift it is to know at the end of every day that there's going to be food on the table when you go home.
And for our producers that are listening that are not familiar with Masters of Beef Advocacy, it is a free program. When I went through it, I think it took me roughly 6 hours to go through all the modules and complete it. But it was a 6-hour time frame that went very fast, at least from my experience, because it was good information presented in a good way, and so it didn't seem like it was a burden. And so I would encourage all of our listeners that have not gone through the Masters of Beef Advocacy program to at least give that some consideration, because it's a good program.
And I would certainly agree with that. In that's roughly 6 hours that you spend, you don't have to budget 6 hours in a row out of your day to do that. You can kind of do that at your own pace as you're doing this online as well. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Beef Roundtable.
We'd like to thank Anne Burkholder from Cozad, Nebraska, and Kim Brackett from Castleford, Idaho, for being our guest today and sharing their thoughts on how producers can tell the beef industry story.
The Beef Roundtable is a joint production between Beef Magazine and the Purdue University Department of Animal Sciences. Beef Roundtable is available on the Beef Magazine website. It's also available on iTunes, our YouTube page, as well as at www.beefroundtable.com. We'd really like to hear your comments, and they can be submitted on the comments page of our website. Future topics that you would like to see us address, or any comments that you might have that adds to the conversation that we've had today with Kim and Anne.
Please join us again next month for another great Beef Roundtable discussion. Until next time, Bert and I hope you have a safe and rewarding month.